Hey, welcome back to Shane Plays. I am, of course, Shane. Have a fun video for you this time, D&D RPG related video. This time, I guess always, right? But this time what it is a topic you can see right there, and I'll explain here in a second why you're looking at a GIMP window, which is GIMP is a image editing software tool, kind of like an open source Photoshop. I'll explain real quick why you're looking at that, and it'll make sense very quickly. But anyway, there was an interesting post made on Facebook in a group called Old School RPGs that I thought the post was interesting, and I thought the comments were interesting, and I thought it would make an interesting, fun video to kind of go through them and add my own comments. So the reason you're looking at the GIMP software instead of like the Facebook post or something else is because I wanted to give privacy to the poster and the people who made the comments. Here are the comments. So if I would have just scrolled through Facebook, then they wouldn't have had privacy. And I didn't have time to contact everybody on this list and say, hey, is it okay if I use your name and all of that stuff? So that's why. But the post was made, as you can see here, in Old School RPGs Facebook group by username James on February 9th of 2026 at 7:05 p.m. So you could real easy, if you want, get on Facebook and go find this actual post. If you're not already a member of Old School RPGs, I'm sure you could join the group, and then you could add your own comments or whatever. So I'm not trying to hide credit for the original poster or the people who made comments, just trying to protect privacy. As you can see, the post originally got 108 comments. I thought actually it deserved more, and it got 24 reactions. Again, I thought it deserved more, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure how many users Old School RPGs has. I'm in a lot of these groups, and I think they're a lot of fun. So the original post was, don't make this a hate thread, which I think is cool. There's plenty of hate and negativity out there. Okay, we can comment on this without being major buttheads. A 5e player, 5th edition, maybe that's shorthand for a new or a newer RPG player, but I'll take it at face value and say someone who's playing D&D 5th edition or, 5th edition variants, because of the OGL and all that, plays an old school RPG for the first time. What one piece of advice do you give them? Now, for me, old school goes all the way back to the early 80s. For other people, it goes back to the 70s. For some people, old school might be the 90s or even the 2000s. But I am taking this, the way I will comment on it, is like basically somebody's playing, BX D&D or AD&D first edition or maybe second edition for the first time. But it could be any number of other old school RPGs. But there's the OSR, which old school Renaissance or old school rules or whatever movement out there, which the games tend to have that flavor, that feel, that lethality, as we'll see as we go through these comments. So that's what this is about. So let's jump on over. And this was hard to get this screenshot of these comments, I have to say, because Facebook is forcing everything into like these pop-ups, these modals for the content, and it was really hard. So I ended up, after messing around for like an hour trying to get to just the straight post in the desktop, I had to go to my mobile app and then open up and do a weird screenshot thing and get it all in one big long screenshot. But here we go. So let's again, the question is, don't make this a hate thread. A 5e player plays an old school RPG for the first time. What one piece of advice would you give them? So here we go. Let's get right on in there. Paul says, use your 10-minute dungeon turns to poke everything in sight with a 10-foot pole. So yeah, we're going straight back to old school D&D. And in that, you had turns you had combat turns, and then you had dungeon turns. You say, okay, for the next 6 turns in the dungeon, and so it'd cover an hour worth of time. You'd have random encounters, or you'd look for traps. It was very it was old school D&D, especially this flavor with 10-minute dungeon turns and everything, was very much about exploring dungeons. And the 10-foot pole, if for some reason you never heard of it, it's kind of a joke, but it's kind of serious. Because dungeon corridors were usually described in terms of 10-foot squares and stuff like that. So you'd be sitting there poking everything with your 10-foot pole. There was a very methodical approach to how the stuff, and you're poking, you're looking for traps and stuff like that with your 10-foot pole. And 10-foot poles used to be as much of a standard of, or a staple of dungeon party supplies as rations and hammers and caltrops and all this other stuff, torches, rope. I mean, it was just how it was. Okay, KH says, you're not just limited to your character sheet. Just describe what you want to do, and your GM will call for a roll. Okay. So what this is saying, as RPG design evolved, advanced, evolved, whatever, it got to where you got all these skills, and you had all these traits and perks and all these feats and everything that would let you do all kinds of different stuff. Back in the day, you had a basic character sheet that had like your stats, your saving throws, your equipment, hit points, armor class, and maybe your spells. And that was about it. Your name, maybe a little portrait you drew on there. You didn't have all these different ways of accomplishing things that were specifically spelled out. So let's say if you're playing like AD&D 1E, or BX, or even the original the white box, or was it white box, kind of a wood grain box, whatever, D&D. I mean, you would just say, hey, DM, or in this case, they're saying GM to be generic. I want to do this, and then the DM would say, think about it in their head and say, okay, here's how we're going to do that, if you can do it at all. Now, there's some replies here, and what you won't be able to see, it's going to read those rather than taking screenshots of the sub replies and then all that. So give me 1 second. Okay, so KH, had said you're not limited to character sheet. And then Mike replied this all day long. Again, this won't be on the screenshot that you're looking at on the video. I'm reading it directly from the Facebook page. Old school character sheets are more outlines than rules as written. And that was in parentheses, or not parentheses, but in quotes. I'm pretty nimble and have a high dex. I should be able to unlock the chest, right? Right. Let the math rocks always be in your favor. Of course, math rocks are talking about dice. And then John also chimed in and said KH this. So strong agreement from Mike and John on KH on that. So Justin said, have a backup character. And then another Justin chimed in and said several backups. So yeah, you'll hear that a lot, kind of as a joke, but it's serious too. It's like, don't get too attached to your character. Have backup characters. It's kind of a joke, kind of a real piece of advice. Don't get too attached to your characters till 3rd level. I think you'll even see some of that here. But what they're talking about is old school games in general tend to be more lethal. They came, especially old school D&D came out of a kind of wargaming frame of mind, and it was becoming this great role-playing kind of thing. But, your character could die real easy. Your character could die in the first encounter, even if you did everything quote-unquote right. So Gregory says nothing wrong with running. Again, kind of speaking to the lethality. You don't have to show up to every fight. You're invited to. Michael says, stop thinking like your character is or should be a superhero. Start thinking like a fragile, clever mortal trying to survive and get rich in a deadly and different world. Again, this is speaking to this sort of lethality, the deadly nature. Not everybody was an adventurer for a reason. It was dangerous out there. The rewards were big, but so was the danger. And sorry, I just had kind of a chime come in there. Samuel says, try to think about what actions your character does in the world that makes them powerful and interesting. Your race class levels aren't meant to be the source of all your abilities in old school games. Now, so this was kind of interesting. This isn't just kind of the pithy response that even I would probably throw out. So I think it's saying take your character sheet, your abilities that you may or may not have, uh, and try to be creative, not just, your race class levels aren't the be all and end all of who you are. And I would say, I mean, yes, that applies to old school, but that also applies to new school. That's just kind of a nice role playing piece of advice, RPG piece of advice in general for TTRPGs. Okay, so James says, have fun and revel in the fact that your character has actual agency and her choices matter for good or evil. Once again, I'm not sure I would apply that to just old school. In fact, you could say that old school was often more, old school D&D especially, not every old school game, was much more, I actually won't say strict, I'll say much more clear in alignment and what your morality meant. So you if you declared you were lawful good or chaotic evil or whatever, then there could be consequences if you didn't follow that. Here we go. Ken again says, don't get too attached to your character, or don't get attached to your character. And then let me roll over here and see what Sam. So Sam replied to Ken and said, I just bought Gary Gygax's last fantasy RPG he made before he died. He calls it the D&D update he was making before TSR fired him. It's an old school style with modern mechanics like ascending armor class. It's called Castles and Crusades, named after the gaming club Gary started making D&D in the 70s. It's super cool and you may like it. Nice. We're starting a new second edition campaign it says doing excited for that. Ken responded, and then Sam said, is George running it? I don't know who George is. Okay, so I got now Castles and Crusades, as far as I know, is not the creation of Gary Gygax. That is Stephen Chenault and company over at Trollord Games, which just happens to be, I'm in Central Arkansas area, and that's where they're based out of. Now, they did work a lot with Gary in the last years that Gary was alive before he passed away, but I'm not sure that was actually a creation of Gary. So I would have to investigate that deeper, but I'm pretty sure that that's not correct. So anyway, and I'm open to being corrected there. We have comments. Leave it on the video if you feel I'm wrong here. But I'm a little bit closer to the Castle Crusades situation than the average bear, but I could still be wrong. Okay, Samuel, back to the comments and getting off of me reading from the Facebook page. If you're looking for a beginner-friendly OSR game, Shadow Dark is pretty easy to learn for 5e players. And I agree with that. Shadow Dark has a lot of 5e elements, 5e rules, mechanics, but it has that old school feel to it. It can still be very gritty and dangerous and dungeon crawly. So yeah, I agree with that. So and Tyler replied to Samuel and said, at least point them towards basic fantasy instead of that uninspired trash. Okay, so again, let's keep it. Now, if somebody doesn't like Shadow Dark, which is like winning every award out there, and I played it and love it, and everybody I know that has played it seems to love it, except for Tyler and maybe a few others, it's not uninspired trash. That's an opinion. That's fine, but I don't agree with that. Shadow Dark's a good game, and if it's not somebody's cup of tea, okay, fine. But like I said, we're going to keep this positive, as the original post said. Don't make this a hate thread, and there's too much of this just bashing on stuff out there. Moving on, Javier says every encounter is super optional. Run away a lot. Again, you don't have to show up to every fight you're invited to. Uh, I mean, a lot of these fights, especially at lower level, you can die in one hit. So be careful about what fights you decide to show up to. Timothy says old school is a lot more about thinking through things, listening at doors, checking for traps, etc. Skill checks weren't really a thing back then. Be careful with a healthy dose of paranoia. Good luck and happy hunting. Um, so I agree with this. Old school's in a lot of ways very methodical. Okay, thief do this, fighter do this, cleric do this. Check for a trap. Listen to the door. Okay, you go in first. There's a very methodical approach to it. It's almost like a military squad. Everybody has the role, and there's a sequence of events that if you follow them, they will definitely, or standard operating procedure, I guess, rather than sequence of events. That if you follow it, it will definitely increase your odds of surviving and getting the fat loot. Okay. Johnny says, go to the window, open it. You know what you have to do. I'm not quite sure. I don't know if he's saying throw out the old school games. I don't know if he's saying throw out 5e, whatever. But I don't know. So unless we're talking about defenestrating is, of course, the term for throwing somebody out of an upper window. And politicians and leaders and stuff used to get defenestrated back in the day. So perhaps he's speaking of defenestrating the beholder that you run into in the dungeon. Okay. Jason says, protect the wizard and the cleric. Don't let the cleric be a frontline fighter. Yeah, these old school games, again, old school isn't just D&D, but we're basically talking about D&D in my perspective, in my commentary here. This goes back to what I'm talking about. There's tactics that you need to follow. All right. The cleric is not a frontline fighter. Now, in some cases, they have to step in and be that in old school when your fighter goes down or something, but they're not supposed to be the frontline fighter. Protect the wizard. Your wizard is both usually your most fragile PC, but also can end up being the most powerful and game-changing in encounters. I mean, I've literally seen wizards that had 1 hit point in first level, so you got to protect them. Okay, John says, bring spare character sheets. Again, going back to that, be ready. I've literally seen, and people laugh and they're like it's a joke or whatever, but I've literally seen this and done it myself where I have Zyrtec the Mighty, my fighter, first level fighter. I think the last time this happened, I was playing the Fantasy Trip, which is Steve Jackson Games. It was an old school fantasy kind of a dungeon crawling game. And, I had Zyrtec the Mighty or whatever, and he got killed. And so I marked out Zyrtec and I put Zyrtec the Second. And I said, Zyrtec the Second runs in to avenge his father, and everybody laughed and everything. But that happens a lot. You'll just say, okay, and the DM will just have to work in your spare character as quickly as they can. And that's even if you do everything right. You're doing your tactics as best you can. It's lethal. Scott, when it's your turn, plan ahead and be ready. Distance is your friend, don't rush in. Okay, so there's 2 different things here. One, distance is your friend, don't rush in. That's melee tactics, warfare tactics. The first one, when it's not your turn, plan ahead and be ready. That's good advice in general. Okay, a lot of people, when it's not their turn, they tune out, they look around. Nowadays, they play on their phone. And then it gets to them and they're like, okay, what? Huh? No, be ready. Just because it's not your turn doesn't mean you're not in the game. Ryan says make 3 more characters while you're at it. Nothing more really needs to be said there. We've covered that a lot already. Andrew, try to think less about the stats and more about the environment around your character and how they would interact with it. Okay, I think that could apply to old school and new school. But it could also apply to old school specifically with that much more of a specific focus on dungeon crawling. You really need to be thinking about, okay, what does this room look like? What is the tunnel suddenly made of a different substance? Are we going up? Are we going down? That is it suddenly cold? That kind of thing. John, forget virtually everything you learned about D&D. Begin anew with an open mind. In a lot of ways, yeah. As far as the rules and the mechanics and the approach to playing, yeah. I mean, the idea of how role-playing works, you don't have to really forget all that. But how, the tactics and how the game works and all that, yeah, you're going to have to relearn a lot. Howard, no one cares about your anxiety. Survival is key. I'm not quite sure. I mean, survival is key, yeah. But you think if survival is key, then you want to be paying attention to anxiety. So I don't know if they mean in-game or out of game. I'm not quite sure what that means. No one cares about your anxiety. Okay, Mike. Let me go open up his comments here so I can read everything. Okay, so what Mike is saying here is mundane items can and will save your life. So he says rope and more rope. Yep, 10-foot pole. There we go again with a 10-foot pole. Hey, is that a gelatinous cube? Oil plus torches plus it's slow equals death in a lot of rounds, but death nonetheless. I'm not quite, I'm trying to think. Oil plus torches plus it's slow equals death in a lot of rounds. So I guess it says it's going to take a lot of rounds to kill you, but that's death nonetheless. Gelatinous cube, of course, can absorb you. If you're super old school, gold equals XP, and that's it. No XP for monsters. Now I think this was a house rule. Okay, so yeah, back in the day, you got XP for each gold piece that you found. And I think maybe at certain levels, you started getting less. And then certain classes, if you had a certain statistic of a certain number or higher, you would get bonus XP and all that. I'd have to go look. But yeah, so he's thinking strategy here, right? Don't just kill monsters. Maximize your gold piece acquisition. If you find a diamond worth 1,000 gold pieces, if I remember right, that would be 1,000 XP. So and then later it became you got XP for both gold and defeating monsters. So and I think no XP for monsters. Now I think this was a house rule. His little parenthetical thing there is back in the day, evidently they were house ruling that monsters gave you XP. He goes on to say running away is a good option many times. And avoiding combat is also a good option as death saves equals 0, aka dead is dead. So, yeah, let me pull up. I'm going to actually drop his whole comment in. Hold on. So, because it's a long comment and I'm reading a lot of that. So, okay. So Mike's total comment is here, as you can see. Like I said, I've read a lot of. I'm not quite. Avoiding combat is also a good option. Yeah, agreed. As death saves equals 0. I'm not quite sure what that means. AKA dead is dead. So yeah, if you miss your death save, if you fail, you're just dead. Regardless of hit points or whatever. So, this just feeds back into what people were saying several times in these comments. Running away is an option. Not poking the bear is an option. Right? You don't have to show up to every fight you're invited to. Be wise. Because, old school characters are usually, even high level old school characters would be squishy compared to today's even low level characters. A first level D&D character these days is much, much harder to kill and can do a lot more damage than a first level character in D&D back in the day. I mean, just big time. So, and then David replied to Mike on this, and he says you always earned XP for defeating monsters. Mike says, I'm thinking the 1974 original White Book. Yeah, he's going old school. And then Brian is coming back, and they're kind of talking here. I'm not going to go into every little thing about this, about what's a house rule and what's not, as far as gold pieces versus monsters for XP. But Chris B finally chimes in and says, Mike, AD&D, 1E, and others certainly had XP for GP as well as defeating monster XP, and that's true. It did get to that point. Okay. Roger says, put yourself in your character's shoes. Be as cautious and thoughtful as you would be if you're really there. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's good advice in general, but definitely back in old school, because you had to be quick on your feet and you had to be quick in your wits and you had to be wise. And even with all that, you need a lot of luck, good fortune, the dice ever in your favor, statistically in your favor if you wanted to pull through. John says, never let yourself get into a fair fight. Always go in knowing that you will win, preparing quarterly. And it's not combat as sport, it's combat as warfare. So John is going into The Art of War by Sun Tzu, right? Only start a fight you know you've already won. I mean, I don't know. That's not always possible in old school. Like, you might, everything seems totally safe, and then you walk into a room and, all heck breaks loose. But yeah, he's saying, stack the odds as much in your favor as possible. James says maybe they should skip the backstory for this one. Yeah, if you spend 3 hours rolling up your character, coming up with this backstory, you may be upset when 20 minutes in you're dead. So yeah, maybe skip the backstory until you're a few levels up. Tito says prepare to die. George says read the rules. I mean, yeah, that's good. That's good advice. They're short. Ask lots of questions. Have fun. Hire a hireling, one half elf or half elf archer. Share treasure with him. You may end up taking over as the hireling. So, hirelings were a big deal back in old school. You would get NPCs. You would hire them. They would take a lot of the risk, but you had to give them a share of the, they'd say, well, I'll come in for 10% of the loot, or they'll say, I want, all of the magical scrolls that we find or something like that. But hirelings were pretty important back in the day. Like, you might have a party of 4 players and you might have 6 hirelings with you. All right. Chris says death happens. Yup. Aaron says, I love the earlier comments about bring spare character sheets, act like a fragile human, not a superhero, etc., etc. That is the big difference. Old school D&D was about campaigns and getting attached to a character's story arc. You knew that the character could die right quick if you made a bad decision, and sometimes it wouldn't even be your fault. He's got more comment. He's got a further comment in here, so I'm going to go find it and expand it. Yeah, it's a pretty long comment, so let me... This is Aaron again. So we already been through this. Sometimes it wouldn't even be your fault. Again, you could do everything, great tactics, and still die. The DM had to be a master in balance, or had to be masterful in balancing the game and your opponent's power. They also had to instill the knowledge that it's okay to run and run fast. If you read any of my posts in the Dark Sun FB page, you will know all my players are paranoid and will often spend an hour with them just freaking out about nothing. Of course, I get an immense kick out of that. For example, at the start of last game, they had just killed a bunch of harpies in a large cylindrical mausoleum, 12 in all, with fireballs and lightning bolts, etc. Then they said they would try to move quietly. Yeah, so I started off with that last battle, just finished, was loud enough to wake the dead. Ha ha ha, in a mausoleum. Ha ha ha. I can kind of hear. Ha ha ha. Get used to dying if you don't play smart. Yeah, I would say that's the salient point here. Get used to dying if you don't play smart. And then Dave replied to Aaron and said, what are you talking about? It was never the DM's job to balance anything. That's why runaway is valid advice. I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, you don't want to drop, the Demogorgon on first level characters. Or you don't want to drop Tiamat on first level characters like they did in the old Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. So Aaron, he kind of laughs again, says I was referring to avoiding TPKs. If I had a TPK, I always considered that my failing as I had overpowered the foe. I don't know if I agree with that. I mean, you can have a well-balanced encounter, which these days there's a lot more focus on, and the party could still have bad dice rolls or have bad tactics and die. So anyway, okay, moving on. Jean-Jacques says, learn Thaco. Yeah, well, if you're playing second edition AD&D, and even I think first edition had kind of an optional or a version of Thaco if you wanted to use it. Learn how Thaco works to hit armor class 0. Lower armor class better, higher armor class worse. Which today people are like, well, that's dumb. But I mean, it just made sense in the back of the day. It wasn't as hard as people make it out to be. Doug says, use your brain. Don't rely on rolls. The DM will fudge to tell you what to do. So I think this is implying, I could be wrong. I think Doug is implying that the DM will always fudge. And fudging means like roll behind the screen and then, tell you a different number or not tell you what number actually rolled and change the result. I don't know if that's what he's saying, but not all DMs fudge. And then Aaron pops in and says, I roll everything in front of them. I don't pull punches ever. So, Jason says lower AC is better. Have fun, ask questions. That goes back to learn Thaco. Rick says use your head. Move slower through the dungeon. Poke things with a long stick. There's dead or alive, not death saves. I'm not sure what he means by that. Death saves were added way far back in the game. Protect your casters. Oh, I think what he's saying by death saves is not just a death saving throw, but now it's like you go down and you get 3 rolls, to either die or not. Yeah, back to you're either dead or not. Later they added like you'd go down to negative 10 hit points and all that. But basically dead is dead in old school. Yeah, that's what he's saying. Protect your casters. Yep. They are but paper in the wind till they reach about 3rd level. Mundane resources and items mean more than you think. Hirelings are always a good investment. So that's kind of reinforcing some of the stuff that's already been pointed out. Kevin, don't get overly attached to your character. Old school isn't about balanced encounters. Running away. Okay, so he's kind of backing up, what somebody else was saying, that it wasn't the DM's job in old school to balance the encounter. Running away is a perfectly acceptable plan of action. Don't get depressed if your character dies. Celebrate how far they got. Yeah, I love that. And see if your next character can do better. Character death isn't inevitable, but it is highly likely. Go out with a flourish and a bang. I love that, Kevin. Yes. Celebrate how far you got. And go out with a bang. And expect that character death can happen. It's not the exception in old school. It's more of the rule than the exception, especially at lower levels. Gideon, don't be afraid to die. Ross, the answer is on our character sheet. We've already kind of talked about that these old characters or character sheets and designs, mechanics in older school RPGs. Now a lot of GURPS might be different, or you had other games out there, but again, we're focusing on mainly like D&D and very D&D similar-ish games, at least as far as my approach to this video. And as most of these comments seem to be going, the answer's on a character sheet. A lot of times, just think about what you want to do. Ask the DM or GM, how do I do this? Dan says, run away, run away. When danger reared its ugly head, Sir Robin turned his tail and fled. So that will keep you alive. Jeff says, not every encounter is a fight. Not every fight is balanced. Get used to player death. So Chris, your mind determines what you can do, not your character sheet. Again, think about it. Ask, can I do this? And then Neil replies, the solutions and adventure is on the table. So it's not just what's on your character sheet. Be imaginative. Think things through. Ask your DM, can I try this? Kevin, have several characters rolled up. Keith, have fun. Yeah, have fun. You're there to have fun. If your character dies, oh well. You're there to have fun. It's a game. John, make a character and jump into the game. Yes, 100%. Just get in there. Have fun. Walter, no participation trophies in 1E. Yeah, basically, I mean, you earn what you get. I mean, some DMs may be more forgiving than others. But yeah, in general, you earn what you get in old school. Steven, combat is the least effective, parentheses, and fun aspect of old school gaming. Walk softly, carry a long stick, and always look for a way to avoid the fight. Yeah. Well, I don't know about always look for a way to avoid the fight, but yeah, you don't think, be smart. I'm not sure if I agree that combat is the least effective and fun aspect of old school gaming. For Steven, it's not. For a lot of people, it's that tactical, war gamey, explore fight is kind of the attraction. Watching your character get more powerful and be able to defeat even stronger, monsters, that power curve going up. I mean, Steven has to like that aspect of it, but it attracted me when I was a kid. Rachel, play like your PC can die because it can. Yep, you're going to, and then Chuck says you're going to die probably more than once. So I would hope if people are paying attention, especially newer players, that you're seeing a trend here. I mean, over and over and over and over, the people that have been there are saying you are going to die, probably more than once. I've heard of discussions lately where they're like, tables have rules where nobody can die. I mean, that's fine if you want to play that way. Nobody can tell you how to play. But if you want to play old school, you're probably going to die a lot. All right, Ken's got a long one here. Most of it is here on the screenshot, so I'm not going to copy his, even though there's a see more here. Most of it's on here. So Ken says you might only have 1 and 2 encounters before you need to head back to town and heal and equip. Yeah, if you've ever played, some of the older computer role-playing games where you have one fight and then you got to go rest. I mean, it's like that. You're not a walking army battalion. You're a group of people trying to survive in a hostile environment, as somebody pointed out way early in these comments. 2, get torchbearers, guards, and shield bearers. Again, hirelings. Since 3, since loot is experience, pick up anything that's not nailed down, including 10,000 copper pieces. Well, I hope you have a portable hole or a bag of holding if you're going to do that. 4, you are not your stats, you are your style and imagination. I mean, this is a recurring theme, almost as much as you're going to die. This keeps popping up in these comments. And then last, Ken says, parlay with everything. And then 6, set ambushes when possible. So in parlay, I think that's kind of in newer style play, especially a lot with the newer players I see, they're more open to looking for a diplomatic or parlay solution than just going in and killing. When I was, cutting my teeth, it was like, rush in and kill them all. So parlaying probably leads to more options and survivability for sure. Willie, don't get attached to your character. Odds are you're going to die before you go up a level. Okay, there we go. That's the recurring theme. Ben, things won't be gated behind perception checks. Ask questions about the environment and the DM will just tell you. Yeah. So from 3E onwards in D&D, I think we've had these perception checks. I don't think they were in 2nd edition. I'm open to be corrected. You have to ask, what do I see here? What do I see here? What do I see here? The DM isn't going to give you a passive perception roll, or you're not going to say, hey, I roll search or I roll perception. What do I find? Okay. You can check for traps. You can check for secret stuff. You can ask the DM or the GM, what do you see? What are you finding? Influencing NPCs won't come from a skill roll. Negotiate, reason with them, deceive them. First level spells are way more powerful than you will expect, but you'll only be able to cast 1 per adventure and only if you're a caster. Yeah, your access to spells and how many spells you can cast goes down a lot. That's talking about the earlier comment. You got to go back and rest, or you got to go back to town. I mean, you throw your web or your magic missile or whatever it is, that your wizard's done. I cast detect magic. I'm done until we rest. You've got to protect your wizard, your magic user. You've got to keep. It will pay off in later levels. First levels, you have got to keep them alive. John, try a DCC funnel to learn that most characters will die before they get to level 1. Learn the runaway is always an option. Learn that runaway. He said the runaway. So DCC is Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is a OSR style game. It's not from back in the day, but it's a newer game in the past, 10 years or more maybe, that uses old school type mechanics and atmosphere. And what a funnel is, if you've never played one, you get a group of people and everybody starts with like 4 or 6 or an amount anyway of 0 level characters. They're just regular people, farmers, peasants, shopkeeper, whatever, kid, whatever. And they go through an adventure, and whoever survives becomes your player character. So it's a lot of people really like them. I've only done it once or twice, but it's kind of a newer, at least to me. This has caught more attention in the mainstream over the past several years. These funnel adventures. Dean says if you play it properly and they come from 5e, so if the players are coming from 5th edition and they're playing it properly, they will die a lot. He had a session. It says just today's session 3 dead, level 3 to 5. It is what it is. There you go. Rain Man. The monsters aren't going to level down to your level and always be an easy kill. Okay, talking about. So I think I'm gonna walk back earlier. I said it's not the DM's job to balance things. When I said, well, it kind of is. I'll still say, the DM doesn't need to be dropping Tiamat on first level characters like they did in the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon, but your chances of running into something that will kill you are probably a lot higher in old school D&D or old school games. Like the kind of the thought now is like if you fight a newer, they didn't have challenge ratings back in the day. They would have like how many hit dice they have or this or that to kind of gauge how tough an opponent was. But if I understand right, the thinking for the past several years has been like if your party encounters a 3rd level monster and engages in combat, if you have a party of 4 and they're all 3rd level and they're fighting a CR3 monster, then they should survive that. Unless there's extenuating circumstances, the dice rolls are terrible or something like that. That kind of thinking, game design, whatever, was really not there back in the day. Alex, embrace procedure. Story emerges from process. So this goes back to what I was saying. There's a method. There's a standard operating procedure that especially old school D&D had. This character class is up front. The thief or whatever is up front. Somebody's got a 10-foot pole. They're checking constantly. They're looking for traps. They're listening at doors. They're if the door is locked, is there a trap on it? We're going to listen before we go in. Before we kick that door open and go in, we're all going to agree that the fighter is going in first, and maybe we're going to cast a couple of spells on the fighter. The wizard is going to throw mage armor on themselves. There's a process. If you've ever seen an army team, breach a house, breach a door, there's this whole thing they go through. Then once you get in the door and the fight starts, you want your spellcasters in the back and protected. Your cleric needs to be in a spot where they can get to people to heal them. There's all, you got your ranged people, you got your melee people. There's a whole, like when I purposefully, I ran a 5e campaign for years, but in between campaigns, we would play like BX, or we would play, first edition. We would do an adventure in first edition, and then go back to our 5e. And I ran Keep on the Borderlands as one of them. You know, one of the best introductory D&D old school adventures ever. I mean, I guess you could turn it into a campaign because you're based out of the keep and you can keep going out and exploring. But I remember, you know, I really told him, I said, look, because these days your thief could be your melee, or your, you know, your magic user could have all kinds of hit points and be running around with a sword. And so they had a whole different mindset of how things worked. And it only took one or two fights for that to get into. I was like, look, you have roles here. I had one player that wanted to do everything in 5e. Even if they were like the magic user, if they wanted the thief, they wanted to listen to the doors. They wanted to go in first. They wanted to get melee. They wanted to do this. They wanted to do that. That's not going to fly in old school. You're going to die real quick. And I remember, you know, even somebody who was a fighter when we were playing BX, and by BX I mean Basic Expert D&D, which was in between. You had old school D&D, you know, OD&D as it were from the 70s. Then you had Basic Expert, BX, B/X. You had First Edition. You had BECME, which was Basic Expert, Companion, Master, I think, Immortal. So you had all these different flavors. And those are all needing a more methodical, tactical approach. So I had a guy who was one of the better players, wonderful player in 5e, good player in BX, but their mindset, like, you know, we got into one of their first major fights. They got into it, a bunch of goblins. It's the one where they can, I think, throw money down a tunnel and an ogre will come out and help them. I think it's an ogre. In the Keep on the Borderlands, in the Caves of Chaos. You know, he rolled up, got, I think, had 5 or 6 hit points, you know, at first level as a fighter, got bipped once on the head for about 4 hit points, and he stepped back real quick and started getting the point that you can't just charge in and do a 5 or 5th edition bull rush on this stuff. You've got to have tactics and strategy. Dale, you must unlearn what you have learned. And he's got that in, you know, it's almost like Yoda. Unlearn what you have learned, you must. Yeah, in a lot of ways. Yeah, tactically, mechanics wise. Yeah, you know, you must relearn how sinister and dangerous things can be and who does what. Zach, enjoy the game and don't get super attached to this character. John, enjoy. Yep, all in caps. There you go, John. Enjoy. Peter, there's more than one way to play every game. Yeah, that's true. You know, although I will say in older dungeon crawls, there's a method I really recommend you following. Tom, in this game you were required to think. If you cannot handle that, go back to 5e. I mean, you still have to think at 5e. Okay, I don't snub my nose at 5e, and like anybody who plays it's not really thinking. It's just a completely different mindset. But you still have to think. Strategy and tactics might not be aren't as important in my opinion. And it's not, you know, roles aren't as critical, knowing your role, ROLE, of your character class, but you still have to think. So, Angel, remember, you don't have to fight everything. Running is an option. Derek, don't get too attached to your character. BJ says, be prepared to roll up another character at any time. Ha 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 ha. Michael, watch for wandering monsters. You never know when you'll run into a giant crab deep inside a mountain dungeon. And I mean, that happens in White Plume Mountain for sure. In a bubble surrounded by hot lava. Hot lava. And Michael put a nice picture of a party fighting a giant crab by the masterful Errol Otis, who's definitely a classic D&D illustrator and has been doing a lot of stuff for Dungeon Crawl Classics. Daniel says, forget everything you know about any RPG game you listen to or any podcast you ever listen to. You're an adolescent. You know nothing. What do you do to survive? Yeah, okay. Approach it as if you know nothing. Be wise. Take nothing for granted, maybe. Joshua, hirelings and move like a unit through the dungeon. Yep. That's kind of what I'm on. You're a unit. You have standard operating procedure. Get the whole group intent and give it to the GM. They can always spotlight when needed. So I think what he's saying is, give the group consensus. Here's what we're trying to do at this part of the dungeon, and the GM can bring things up as needed. Marco, enjoy it. David, bring your calculator or practice your mental math. Yeah, there's especially, I mean, now if we want to, so D&D, you got a little bit more math. If you want to break out of D&D and get into like a lot of other games like Champions and Rollmaster and which some people call Chartmaster, Villains and Vigilantes, GURPS. Yeah, there's a lot more math and formulas and stuff, which that doesn't bother me. Never bothered me back in the day. But I think a lot of newer players would be like, what the heck? Ross says, read Matt Finch's quick primer for old school gaming. Okay, sure. I don't know if I'm familiar with that, but there you go. Go check it out. Dan, don't worry about the rules. I am DMing. Just tell me what to do and I will handle it. You just got to have fun. I hate when players obsessively read the rules and feel like they need to know the system inside and out. Okay, so that's an interesting point. Let's camp out on that for a second. Back in the day, it wasn't expected that players knew all the rules inside and out. Now, there were players' handbooks that had certain, character creation, this, that, and the other stuff in them. And then you had Dungeon Master's guides or GM's guides or whatever that had a whole lot of other rules in them. But yeah, it was a lot more. The thought back in the day, a lot more was the DM will help you. The DM will tell you what to do. You don't need to know every little rule. In fact, that can be annoying to a DM when somebody reads the rules obsessively and they're always constantly bickering or debating or whatever with the DM or other players. Now, not everybody who knows the rules and brings up a rules question is a rules lawyer. But somebody can become a rules lawyer and become very irritating and annoying and lessen the fun of the game. So Dan is saying, hey, your DM will tell you what you need to do. And so that's a recurring frame that we've heard, or refrain that we've heard in these comments, seen in these comments, read in these comments, if you will, that just tell the DM what you want to do, and he'll tell you what to roll or how to handle it. Miguel, have fun. Don't take it personally. Keep in mind it's a completely different game system. That's great advice, Miguel. That's a great way to put it. John, remember that most people don't play vanilla OSR. Vanilla OSR means, rules as written, RAW. Everyone has their favorite house rules. I've never, ever, ever played a game. Now, at a tournament, or not a tournament, but a convention, maybe not. But even then, the DM or GM at a convention will say, okay, I have a house rule like this. You all come together, you play together one time. You might never play with that group again, but even then, the DM or GM will have a house rule. But yeah, every group I've ever played with has house rules. Everyone has their favorite house rules. Those rules are what makes the game work in a way that fits their table. Yes. Look around at the various options and house rules. Watch some videos about how people add to their games. Find what works for you. So like John has a longer comment here. So let me go down and see how big it is. John. Okay. So he says, when I played D&D in school, it was a mix of basic first and second editions with a whole stack of content from Dragon Magazine mixed in. Our club had books from a dozen different sources, most of them secondhand. Today, I still remember most of those old homebrew solutions, though they often work less well than I remember them. Okay, so I'm going to camp out here for a second. So like John, back in the day when I was playing in the 80s, mid 80s, was when I really got into D&D. I messed around a little bit. I played Villains and Vigilantes and some Traveler and some other stuff and a little bit of D&D before then, but I really got into D&D around 8th grade. Although I was into RPGs before then. And we played, I didn't realize at the time, but looking back, I realized we played a mix of AD&D First Edition and BX, Basic Expert, B/X. I didn't even realize it at the time, but we did. It's, as I've read through the rules in later years, remembered things, uh, put stuff together. I'm like, we were doing a blend, and I didn't realize at the time, or if I did, I'd forgotten about it. And we still had fun. So as long as the rules work, as long as the game keeps moving forward and everybody's having fun, in my opinion, that's fine. We didn't use minis back in the day. I wouldn't have been against minis, but my group just didn't. We used dice if we needed to. We would put dice out, and we didn't have 5-foot grids or any of that. 1-inch grids that represented 5 foot or 10 feet or any of that 10-foot square. We just put dice out if we needed to say, well, this guy's here and you're attacking here and da da da. And I have great memories. So yeah, you could even play the game quote unquote wrong and still have a great time. What you have to remember is every table's different. You might go to somebody else's table and they play more by the book. And it's you don't need to be going, hey, no, just let that table, especially that DM or GM, kind of set the standard and the way things are done. Also, house rules. I'm a big fan of house rules because you're never going to love every rule that's written into a game. And then sometimes there might have been, even though there's play testing and this and that, it might be bad design on that rule. So it's okay to come up with your own house rule. Whatever keeps the game moving forward in a way that is consistent, I'll come back to that, and respectful to everybody is okay. So what I try to do with my players, if I have to do a house rule on the fly, I will say I'm going to do my best to do it this way from now on. So I think it does get frustrating if you house rule it one way in one situation and then completely different in another situation. That's going to frustrate your players. They're going to feel like, I don't know, like maybe they can't trust the game system that the way you're running it. So just keep that in mind. I think consistency in house rules. But if you end up playing where you only use 10% of the game system is written and 90% is house rules, as long as everyone's having fun and you're being consistent, I totally, that's fine. All right. Joseph says, don't miss your saving throw. True. Another interesting thing about saving throws, a lot of people think saving throws are put in there to kill you. Saving throws are actually put in by Gary Gygax to give your character a chance of surviving, because there was so much, it's binary 0-1, you're either dead or not. And so he introduced these saving throws to give your character, because rocks fall, everybody dies. And so he came up with saving throws to give your character a chance of surviving the rocks falling, or you got the death magic cast on you. At one point, like, hey, he cast, spell of death and you're dead. Well, no, let's give you a chance to survive. So, ironically, a lot of people, like I said, they think that saving throws were put in there as an extra way to kill you. Their intent was to give you more chances to survive because of the lethality. Gavriel, welcome to a world of pain and weird numbers. And I loved that world of pain and weird numbers. That weird numbers made it feel special. Archduke, fear everything. You have 4 hit points. Yep. If you're lucky, you got 4 hit points. Doug, don't get too attached to your character. Until it reaches at least level 3. There goes that sort of half joke, half serious advice again. No backstories, no plot tie-in, no main character syndrome. As a player, your characters are a part of the world, not the story. Stories are what you make along your character's journey, not a plot carefully molded around your elaborate ideas of a main character. Buy into the world, buy into the game mechanics, buy into the fact that your character exists to go on adventures to get treasures, not becoming an Avenger and saving the world. Yeah, I mean, I think overall that's pretty good advice. Now, the DM might want to tell a story where you become an Avenger and save the world, but that's not the majority of times what people were playing for back in the day, they were playing to adventure and see how high level they could get and how much loot they could get and how much they could survive and this, that, and the other. It was just an accomplishment to survive. Barry, you are not your PC. You can have a whale of a time while your PC suffers horribly. Yep. Yeah. You know, did you go out in a blaze of glory? Was a good story told? Did a good story unfold? You know, kind of going back to Doug's comment. Terry, you're not limited by your character sheet. So here we go with this again. It's player skill, not PC powers. Treasure is XP. Have multiple characters. Avoid combat as much as possible. Be extremely cautious. Teamwork is important. There we go. I keep hammering that. Retreat is always an option. Enjoy. Benjamin, think before you act. But if you are going to go out in the blaze of brutal and bloody gory, and he threw the finger horns with an emoji. Yeah. I mean, if you're going to go out. You know, go out. Make that death mean something if possible. Although it's very possible you walk in your very first encounter, you swing and miss, and and that skeleton bops you over the head and you're dead. It's possible. Especially at first level. Bob, have a few backup characters. Michael, I have a quick rundown of game differences to help 5e players understand AD&D. Let me see. But then it's kind of stops. So let me see if I can find Michael. Yeah, I think Michael forgot to post the rest of his comment. Either that or maybe he's kind of joking and he intentionally left it blank. I don't know. Doug, I'm going to cheat and dovetail two things together, but this is what I tell such folk. Balance is a lie. No one picks a fair fight. Okay. I still think that there are extremes of that should be avoided. But yeah, I mean, you're probably going to find less balance in old school than you will in newer games. Andrew, celebrate life. It is short, especially for a first level old school character. Eric, 10-foot pole. Seriously, back to the 10-foot pole. Trevor, check for traps. Klaus, start by playing a fighter. Yeah, your chances of surviving are greater as a fighter. Your hit points are probably going to be higher and you're going to do more damage. And your AC is probably going to be better. So the way it worked in the old days, like pull up a seat, youngins, and I'm going to tell you about the old days. Sure, okay, boomer. But no, seriously. So in the old days, there was you can find it out there. Search for, like first edition AD&D power curve for different classes. And the fighter, their power level jumps up almost immediately, but then levels off in later levels. A wizard starts very low, and then there's this steady curve upwards to where in later levels they eclipse the fighter. So a first level fighter, could probably just smoke a wizard, no problem. You get in later levels, and a wizard is just absolutely going to own and handle a fighter. Newer versions of D&D, not so much. They fiddled with that so that everybody gets more of a similar power curve. But old school, no baby. So if you want to survive your first few levels, your best chance is by playing a fighter. But then arguably the later levels are more fun for other classes. I don't know. Douglas, my name is the Dungeon Master. You killed my NPC. Prepare to die. Yeah, the DM may be trying to kill you. It's possible. James, embrace character death. Lean into it and have fun. All right, Shane Stacks. This is me. So I didn't blot out my last name here. Every class has a role and tactics are important, which I've already said. Don't get too attached to a character until at least 3rd level. Yep. So, Nicholas, bring 2 characters. Also, party balance is a lot more important. Yes, party balance is critical. Can't stress that enough. You need a fighter. You need a thief. You need a cleric. You need a magic user. Chuck, bring extra character sheets. Crail, explain THAC0. Okay, we've already covered THAC0, but now THAC0 wasn't there in original D&D. It wasn't there in B/X, Basic Expert. It wasn't there in first edition, really. I don't think it was there in BECME, the Basic Expert. What was C? I forget. Companion? Master? Immortal? Anyway, the BECME, each letter stands for a further progression of, like, this book is, Basic is level 1 through 3, Expert is level 4 through 6, Master is level 11 through 12. It was something like that. They're all color-coded, the books. They didn't use THAC0. They did use a flavor of lower armor classes better. But what would happen is, depending on your class and your level, then your 2-hit matrix was different. And then later they simplified it by this 2-hit armor class 0 thing. Everybody just worked off what does it take for you to roll to hit armor class 0, and they kind of, but still it could be wildly different among different classes. And also, pull up a chair again, youngins. Class back in the day, like in early D&D and Basic Expert anyway, I'd have to refresh on OD&D, which was like 1974. AD&D was not this way, but Basic Expert was. Maybe OD&D, I'd have to look. I know in OD&D you had Fighting Man, you had Magic User, and Whole. I don't know, I'd have to go look. It's been a long time. But anyway, in Basic Expert, you had if you were an elf, that was a class. You weren't an elf that happened to be a fighter, or elf was a class, dwarf was a class. So demi-humans were a class, which is also hard for newer players probably to get their heads around, but it was all just kind of rolled into one class. Joe, don't go back to 5th. Okay, I mean, that's up to individual taste. I've had fun playing 5th edition, and I've also had a lot of fun playing old school. Finally, DM so-and-so says, you are playing a survival horror RPG, not a heroic one. That's probably pretty, I mean, it's not quite Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu is very lethal also. Super lethal, and they introduced the sanity checks. You could have plenty of hit points or whatever it was called in Call of Cthulhu left and fail your sanity check and go out in a blaze of glory. My favorite sanity check roll story is they were up on top of a skyscraper in like 30s New York or something, and they looked at what, I don't know if it was Cthulhu or a great old one or something awful, and the guy failed his sanity check, so he popped a grenade, put it in his mouth, jumped off the skyscraper and detonated on the way down. That was a good one. So there you go. I'd love to see your comments. Maybe I'll do a future sequel video to this if we get enough comments on the YouTube video, and kind of add to that if we get stuff that substantially adds to the. We've already had several themes emerge, right? Don't get to attack for your characters. Bring plenty of character sheets. Everything's lethal. Understand the math is different. Party tactics, party teamwork, unit cohesion, whatever is very important. So if we just get a lot of more comments like that, I would still love to see those comments, but that probably wouldn't justify another video. But if we get, stuff that's substantially, that's good for thought, maybe I'll do a sequel video on this based on the YouTube comments. So I think I've already kind of summarized my opinion. If somebody wanted to play old school coming from 5th edition or some of the newer style games, there's really nothing new. If I had to pick one thing out, it would be the party strategy and teamwork. And every class has its role, because that class role in teamwork in older school games has become very diluted in new school games. Your magic user might be your lock picker, or whatever. I've seen people specifically design characters so they could try to do everything. Um, and that's just not that way in most old school games. Now it can be. I mean, GURPS, you can make whatever character you want, and this and that and the other. But if you're playing old school D&D or similar games like Fantasy Trip or whatever, Tunnels and Trolls probably similar. Or if you're playing newer games that are under the OSR banner like Shadow Dark or Castles and Crusades or Dungeon Crawl Classics or any of the other. There's a million. There's all stuff from like Goodman Games and Frog God Games and Pace Setter Games. That's just to name a very few. There's so many new games that use old school atmosphere and mechanics. Blue Home. I could just go on and on. So many. I'm leaving some out that are just after the video. I'll be like, wow, I can't believe I didn't mention them. There's a ton of them out there. That teamwork, that everybody has the role. And it works. It might sound like, oh, well, that's boring. Only it still ends up being fun. There's still a lot of drama and, knuckle biting and discovery, and the story, as one said, the story emerging as you play rather than trying to dictate what the story is going to be. Anyway, so that would be my thing. And again, just don't take it personally if your character dies. It's almost certainly going to happen. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for James making this post in Old School RPGs and to everybody who commented. Again, you can go to Old School RPGs on Facebook, that group. This was from February 9th at 7:05 p.m. And find it from James. Don't make this a hate thread. If a 5e player plays an old school RPG for the first time, what one piece of advice do you give them? You can find this and comment on it yourself, respond. And I will say, for the most part, I do think people did a very good job of not making it a hate thread. So a couple of snarky comments here and there, but, not as many as there could have been. So anyway, thanks so much for watching / listening, and we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.